Good evening, shut-ins, and welcome to the Thursday evening Faye and Ken show. Ken is the one in the back room making all the technical stuff happen, otherwise we wouldn't be doing this. So every Thursday we try to provide a variety of informational and entertainment features for you. Like last week was Frank Lloyd Wright, and of course following that is our own microbiologist and immigrant, Elio Schaechter, whom you all know, I'm sure, and a little bit at the end we'll hear from his wife Edith. I was interested in Elio not because of his scientific achievements, which are many, or his interest in mushrooms, which we won't talk about today, because you all know about that, but because of his the road he had throughout his life, especially his first 21 years, where he lived in different places and had different experiences, much like many immigrants have today. So with that, I bring you my interview with Professor Elio Schaechter.
So, Elio Schaechter, my neighbor, I'm delighted to have you on our Thursday afternoon show here. To know more about you, even though you're a very transparent guy, and people know a lot about you here. So today we're not going to talk about mushrooms and you at all, because everyone knows that. I know you'd love to, but we're not. But what amazed me is you sent me essentially a book, your autobiography. Would you call it that?
I call it memoirs.
Memoirs,
because
okay.
It's not meant to be as totally precise and complete. It's more what I remember. You know, it's whatever comes into my head.
So it's very impressive. Usually when I interview somebody, I don't have their entire life in front of me. So I know more about you than I know about me, but it's very well written. Do you expect to publish it, or why did you write it?
No, I don't. It's online. And if anybody wants to see it, it's very easy to get to. You just Google Elio's memoirs. And there it is. It's
Okay.
20 chapters.
20 chapters. Okay. Elio's apostrophe S.
Yes, memoirs.
Memoirs.
And if you Google it, there it is.
Okay. So very interesting.
And I'd like people to see it, I'll admit.
So it really is in two parts. It's your part before you came to the United States and after. And as you say in the preface, before you came to the United States, your life was rather unusual. And I would classify that part as the refugee part. And it's the part that I'm interested in.
Okay.
Because we have such a problem with refugees in this world now. Probably we have more refugees than ever has been in the world. And it always has impressed me that what refugees go through is so life-changing when they survive. And of course, you were not in any life-threatening situations in your refugee era, but you could have been. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes.
And but the changes you went through were phenomenal, and you adapted to them in an amazing way. And there's still holes in the story that I'd like to know more about. And so the first thing is you were born in Italy, of all places, which surprised me.
Yes.
And maybe you, I don't know.
It is surprising because my parents came from Eastern Europe, from Poland. They were Jewish.
Yeah.
And not many Jewish people went to Italy, especially after the First World War. But my father was a bit of an adventurer. And although the family had moved to Vienna, Poland, after the war, he decided to go to do this amazing thing and go to Italy.
Yeah.
And
Why
then,
do you think he picked Italy?
because it was adventure. Italy was different. It was exciting, untraditional, not where nice Jewish boys went. They went to New York, they went to Vienna, they went to Berlin. But
You said there were only 10,000 non-Italian Jews there. That's a lot, but still.
Sure. It wasn't a lot. So he went to Italy and eventually traveled around Italy, found some kind of jobs, and eventually decided to get married and asked his aunt in Vienna to find him a wife. So it was an arranged marriage. He went to
Now that's
Vienna,
interesting.
liked what he saw, brought my mother to Italy, was born there, in Milan.
In Milan, such an exciting, highly cultured city.
Vibrant city, yeah. And
How, what a wonderful place to grow up.
I was there. I went to school in a Jewish parochial school, if you want to call it that. It was, of course, all the kids there were Italian Jews, so I was very different. By that time, I learned Italian, of course, but they didn't speak Yiddish. I didn't speak Yiddish. My parents were very conflicted between wanting me to be Jewish and wanting me to be Italian, which is the kind of conflict that happened in Europe, happened in America among Jews, not knowing which side they belong to.
I was going to say that, first of all, I don't know why your father left Poland.
Oh, there was the war. There was the First World War. Southern Poland, with Galicia, which is where he's from, he's a Galiciano. That part of Poland was battlefront to the Russians. So it was a good idea to leave. And since Poland was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, you didn't need a visa. You just got into a train and went to Vienna.
Ah. Now, Vienna, where does Vienna come into this? Because Vienna sounds like it was a very sophisticated city, maybe on the verge of anti-Semitism, I don't know, but it's a long way from Milan.
My mother's family went to Vienna before, and my mother became very cultured. She spoke perfect, flawless German. She went to the theater, she went to the concerts. She did a lot of the things that a young Viennese would do. My father's family was less sophisticated, actually. He lost both his parents quite young. So he was in the hands of an aunt, and he did not become terribly acculturated. He did not become very Viennese.
Did your father leave because of persecution or because of economic reasons, or what was his motivation to leave Poland?
As I say, the main motivation was the war was on, and the battlefront was very near. So he didn't want to be where the shooting was. But on the other hand, it was not terribly friendly. The Poles were not terribly friendly to Jews, so it was not a good place to be.
Was there a beginning of anti-Semitism, actually, policies that discriminated against Jews when he was leaving?
Well, Poland was, for many years, Jews had gotten to Poland around the Middle Ages, before the Middle Ages. They coexisted very nicely until they didn't. So by the 19th century, there was a fair amount of anti-Semitism, and Jews were discriminated against. But they could survive. I mean, they could make it. But so that was not the main reason why my father left. It was easy to leave, but the main reason was to get out of the shooting.
Did he sense something worse coming on?
No.
Oh.
The Holocaust was totally unforeseen, even though there had been pogroms, which are sort of persecution of Jews in certain towns in Russia and in Poland. They were not that major. They were not anything like the Holocaust, which happened in the Second World War.
Do you think he experienced pogroms while he was living in Poland?
I don't think so. No, I don't think so. I'm not sure because I don't know that much about his early life, but I don't think so. There were pogromlets, probably. Minor pogroms, probably.
So would you say his background is sort of like Fiddler on the Roof? Maybe he lived in a shtetl?
Yes, he lived in a shtetl. My mother did not. She lived in a small city called Tarnobrzeg, which I visited, by the way, some years ago, even though there was nothing left of my family there. Tarnobrzeg was a town of about 100,000. it had, so it was sort of more modern than the Schaechter. My father came distinctly from the Schaechter. It was a little town where Jews and Poles coexisted more or less.
You went to, would you say Jewish schools or Yiddish schools, or how would you describe the kind of
I
school?
went to Jewish school, distinctly not Yiddish.
Oh,
There were Italian schools in Italy. The Italian, I was born there, so that's my first and only schooling in Europe was in Italy. So the schools, what happened was by 1938, it was when I was 10 years old, Jews were not allowed to go to public schools. Mussolini had embraced
really?
anti-Semitism, yeah, even though the Italians were not that particularly anti-Semitic. They didn't know what a Jew was, practically. In fact, when the racial laws, as they were known, got promulgated, that is, it was said that Jews could not do this, could not do that, such as attending regular school. I remember seeing people on the street looking at each other and saying, racial laws, what race is this? They're not black, they're not yellow, what are we talking about? They had no idea about Jews. There were very few Jews.
Huh.
But they had to go to a special school. The school was fancy because the teachers had been kicked out. So we had, and they had been kicked out not only from the regular schools, but from the universities as well. So I was taught by university professors in grade school and high school.
Oh, so by that time, the Jews had been kicked out of jobs, including
That's right,
university
in
professors.
1938. Yeah.
Wow.
That was because the pressure that Hitler made on Mussolini. Mussolini was not, before that, he had not given big signs of being particularly interested.
The language of instruction in your school was what?
Italian.
Italian.
Oh, yes. No, there was no Yiddish. These people
Oh.
did not, none of my classmates had a clue. Their parents, they were not, Yiddish was limited to Eastern European Jews. Italian Jews spoke none of that. Spoke Italian.
So you-
Many may have spoken a form of a language that was spoken by Sephardi Jews called Ladino, but I doubt that the Italian Jews did that. It was used in Turkey and Greece.
Not unlike many situations for kids, I guess, that you had to deal with being Jewish, and I don't know how much that was a part of your identity, and then being a Polish Jew, which was sort of on the lower end of the totem pole, and then
Right.
being an Ashkenazi Jew when Sephardic was
Right.
had more
Dominant.
state. Yeah. So how did that affect your self-concept, do you think?
Well, I probably.
So you're a microbiologist, but
You're asking me for memories from way back. I know that I was different. I was very aware that I was different. I tried to make the best of it. When you're young, when you're 10, 12 years old, what do you do? When you're different, well, you try to pass. I tried to pass. My Italian was impeccable. I mean, I spoke perfect Italian. So it was not a language barrier. But I had to pretend I was Italian
in a Jewish school.
in a Jewish school. So I grew up different in the sense that I was not an Italian and I was not an Italian Jew. Two differences that were quite marked. But you make the best of it. When you're young, you're quite elastic.
Well, that's what's sort of interesting to me. I mean, some kids do not respond so flexibly,
I suppose.
but you must have had good support from your parents. You were the
I
only
did.
child.
Yeah. But my mother was, as I say, she was westernized.
Right.
So I'm not going to be Austrian. I'm going to be Italian. That's fine with her. She had no problem with that because that was Europe. And my father was, as I say, a little bit coarser on the edges when it came to culture and education. And so he did the best he could.
You mentioned that he stuffed a potato in your mouth. Could you say a little bit more about that?
I liked boiled potatoes, cold boiled potatoes. And one day, I was, apparently I was 5, I don't know, 4 or 5 years old, and I didn't know, and my Italian was apparently not that perfect, because instead of calling them boiled potatoes, I called them raw potatoes. It woke my father up. He was taking a nap. No good. So he went to the kitchen, got a raw potato and stuck it in my mouth. That was the
Not
raw
to get too
potato.
psychoanalytic, but that's a very interesting story about your father, because in other
Yes.
parts of your memoirs, you talk about him being invulnerable and
yeah.
very protective. And then sometimes you talk about him being very impulsive, irascible,
Yeah,
and
he was.
difficult. Yeah, both of those things.
That's right. He was quite a character. So then we left Italy.
Could I ask you another question? Well, I'll ask it later, but no. Where are your parents now, or what happened to your parents? I know we're going to go through your whole long story here about all the places you lived and
Right.
left, but what happened to your parents
Both my parents died in Israel.
in Israel?
How did they get to Italy? They did not go to Israel from Italy at all. Even though my mother was an ardent Zionist, she was a theoretical Zionist. It did not include going to Israel.
Huh,
She was
really?
very supportive of Israel, but she didn't particularly want to go there. It seemed to be too strange, too different,
Huh.
too remote. So what happened was we tried to leave Italy. This was 1940, the war was on. And we left via Portugal. How do we get to Portugal from Italy? Well, you can only go by
We'll talk about that in a
ship.
minute. Yeah.
We went by ship, so we found a ship to take us from Genoa, Italy, to Barcelona, Spain. In a couple of days we got there. That was not without problems, because at every time we crossed the border we had problems, but we made it. We crossed Spain through Madrid by train and made it to the border with Portugal, where we found that our visa for Portugal, the transit visa.
I'm going to get to all that soon, but I'm still in Italy.
Okay, let's go back.
I just threw in parenthetically what happened to your parents, and I will get back to that. I also was interested in the fact that you read these children's encyclopedias from cover to cover,
I did.
and memorized them. That was very interesting. Tell me more.
Well, I was a very curious kid, and I was insatiable in reading. And so my parents, when I was about 10 years old, bought me a 10-volume encyclopedia for children in Italian. Enciclopedia dei ragazzi, the encyclopedia for children. And I read it literally top to bottom, from A to Z. And I retained a lot of that. To this day, my head is full of useless information. So
Is that sort of an only child's occupation?
That's
When
right.
Yeah.
That was being an only child.
But you said you weren't a great student.
I'm sorry?
You weren't a great
I
student.
was not, because I didn't care. I was not that interested in school. My passion was reading, doing things other than in school. I was not a particularly good student because I didn't care. I was sort of a B student.
Huh, interesting. And look at you now.
I'm still a B student.
So, what was the motivation to leave Italy? Your father had moved the family from Milan to Turin, which sounded like a pretty good deal.
It sounded like a really good deal. He had a nice store. My father was a businessman, and he sold clothing, including ski clothing, which was nice because in the wintertime we went to places, to ski resorts, where he would hire a sled and had a big ad on the sled saying Schaechter store, or whatever the name of the store was. And I rode that sled through the snow. It was a lot of fun. But anyhow, why did we leave Well,
You left Milan for Turin.
then we went back. Yeah, then we tried to go to Australia and had a complicated story, which it didn't work. We didn't
Oh,
make it
what was
because
happening? What was happening in Italy, even that would motivate your father or your family to want to leave Italy?
in 1938 Mussolini passed law saying Jews in Italy who were not born there, who had been there less than 20 years, had to leave.
Oh, had to leave. Oh,
Yeah, they were kicked out. So my father didn't take it very seriously because laws in Italy were not meant to be enforced so fast. Italy was not, it was not a police state. It was not that serious. So, and he knew he had friends in the police, so he thought he was safe. However, in time, things got hot. Things got hot, and a lot of people came through to us from the north, from Austria and from Germany, because by that time Hitler had really meant it. The Kristallnacht had happened in 78 or 79, I think. So we knew that things were getting very serious. And my father decided to take this seriously and to decide to leave on that account.
and were you aware of this as a kid? You were.
Yes, I was.
You were.
Yeah. But as I say, as I wrote, I wasn't particularly worried because my father would take care of it, which he did.
And your father was sort of a freedom fighter, and he was helping other Jews escape, wasn't
He was helping other Jews escape. There was a sort of an underground movement to get Jews into France before France got occupied, because that seemed safe. So to go to France, you take a boat from Genoa, and my father went on that boat a number of times because he spoke Italian. He could arrange it for these German-speaking Jews from Austria, Germany. So he went with them and went back. That was very dangerous.
Yeah, that was pretty heroic of him.
It was.
But he already sensed that he had to get out. So
He said,
Australia
yes,
was the first destination he picked as possible because
well, he got a visa for Australia. Don't ask me how, but he must have known somebody who knew somebody in the Australian consulate. So he got a visa, and we had a ticket on a ship to go from Italy to Australia. We got to Genoa, got onto the ship, our luggage, our big trunks were put on the ship, and we were told, sorry, but you cannot go. Why not? We have a visa, we have a passport, we have a ticket, why can't we go? And what we were told was the following, I remember this vividly. My father still had a Polish passport, he never became Italian, oddly enough. The Polish passport was valid. It was valid for the trip to Australia. However, it would have run out had we not been accepted by the Australians, and had the ship had to take us back, the passport would have not been valid. On account of that, they said we cannot go. My father had powers of persuasion. I'm sure he tried to bribe the purser and so on. Nothing worked. They took our trunks off the ship and said goodbye. So we went back to Milan.
You also mentioned that in Italy you were allowed to leave with your stuff, as opposed to Germany, where Jews couldn't leave with anything. So
my father could take some of the money he had. He wasn't a rich man, but he had some money, so he could take money with him. And the odd thing, he could also take our possessions. They were put in a huge box, an immense box, which was called a lift. Don't ask me why. I never heard of that.
you couldn't lift it.
And it was shipped off to what eventually our eventual destination, which was Ecuador. When we got to Ecuador, guess what? The lift was there. Unbelievable. They made it from Italy to Ecuador. And there it was, intact. So we had a lot of furniture and clothes and...
Wait a minute. Okay. I'm interested that you picked initially Australia. Was that because you couldn't get into the States, or because you wanted...
you couldn't get into the States. That was very difficult. And anyhow, my father had some connection. He knew somebody who knew somebody. And that's the way things were. So there was a connection with Australia, and he was offered a job. He got frustrated. He would get a job in some business.
So you're ready to go to an English-speaking country, even though you're already speaking all kinds of other languages, but not
But not English.
No.
Of course.
You talk about English as being the only language that in which you have an accent. Say a little bit more about that.
Well, the joke in the family is I speak 4 languages, but English is my best. What happens is English is in fact my best language. I speak it and write it. I don't speak it, I speak it with an accent, but I write it better than any other language. I'm totally at home and I like to write in English. However, I learned it after puberty. And when you learn a language after puberty, the accent stays with you. So even though my accent is not ferocious, I mean, it's not like I just got off the boat, but still, it's recognizable. Whereas in Italian, in German, in Yiddish, in Spanish, I don't have an accent.
But nobody in your family, well, just you and your parents, were concerned about going to a country in which yet another language is spoken.
Well, you couldn't go to an Italian-speaking country.
I guess not.
Or a Yiddish-speaking country. So, you had to go to a country where there was a different language. So I suppose that was accepted.
Was going to Israel a possibility at that time?
Vaguely. It wasn't easy. The British were, they owned Israel, essentially. And they were not very happy to have Jews come for internal politics. They didn't want to help the Jews as opposed to help the Arabs. So it was difficult. It would have been a chore.
And your mother was not too in favor.
She wasn't ready, no. But her sister, who came with her family from Vienna, made it to Israel. So it was possible, but not easy. But for some reason, I don't quite understand it, because let's say she was a rabbi Zionist. Go figure.
It's different than living in Israel, yeah. The
right.
idea is good, yeah.
Yes, in theory, it's a great idea.
So you had to stay in Italy another year, didn't you? And
we stayed another year, and the war was on. We got bombed. That is, we had to spend the night in the basement because there was bombing going on. I still went to school, but my parents stayed in this tiny apartment they didn't go out in the daytime. It was not safe.
You mentioned that. Why they didn't go out in the daytime? Because
Jews weren't supposed to be there. That is, non-native Jews were not supposed to be there. And if for some reason the police would stop you, you'd be in trouble.
Did Jews have armbands like in Germany?
No.
How did they know you were Jewish?
They didn't, but we didn't look exactly Italian. We looked more northern, blonde, etc. So, it could have happened. I don't think it happened. It had to happen. But my father did go out, but for short times and as brief as possible.
Did this happen to the Sephardic Jews or the high-class German Jews or the other Jews that you were not part of?
The Italian Jews were in fact high class. They were very highly educated. They were they were rich. And in fact, some were fascists. There were some Italian Jews who were friends of Mussolini's. There you have it. Some were not. So they were not persecuted until later, when the Germans took over it. And at that point, of course, it was free for all. The Italian Jews. She called it Primo Levi. It's an example of somebody who ended up in a concentration camp in Auschwitz. So they were persecuted then. But until then, what happened was Italian Jews were sent in exile to a small town in the country, where their only job was to report once a day to the chief of police. And they were not persecuted.
These were Jews who were born in Italy.
That's right.
And they stayed.
well, as I said, I'm sorry.
They stayed in Italy
They
during the
stayed in
war.
Italy. And many got into trouble when the Germans came. So,
Mm.
but many Italians tried to save the Jews. Many ended up in monasteries and convents pretending to be Christian,
Hmm.
to be Catholic, and they were saved by it. A lot of Jews were also smuggled into Switzerland with the help of Italians.
That's very interesting. So you finally, then a year later, were able to get passage on a ship, well, ships that went a lot of different places. And you mentioned you landed in Portugal
That's
and
right.
how
Well, we
wonderful that
landed in
was.
Spain from the
Uh-huh.
ship. We took the ship from Italy to Spain, crossed Spain by train, and we got to Portugal.
And you loved it.
Portugal, fun.
And you loved it.
We loved it in Portugal because Portugal, for one thing, by that time, had experienced the war, and the war meant that there was, what do you call it? The lights were out. There was, what's the word for it?
Blackout.
Black. So we got, and it was true in Spain also, because Spain had just finished their civil war. But when we got to the border, when we got to Portugal, all the lights were lit up, and everything seemed normal. Lisbon, the capital of Portugal, which is where we went, seemed like a normal city. So I enjoyed that, and we lived in a pension, place where they gave us bed and breakfast, bed and food. And that was occupied by quite a few single bachelor Portuguese men, and they took care of me. They really took care of me. They're so kind. They took me to places, they took me to the movies, they took me to a bullfight, etc. So I was really taking care of them. They were lovely people.
And you couldn't speak
We spent
Portuguese.
3 months there.
Oh, 3 months. You couldn't speak Portuguese when you came.
No, of course not. Não falo português. But Italian helped.
Uh-huh. You were bar mitzvah age at that time. Did you just pass your bar mitzvah over, or how did that?
No, I was just short. I was 12.
Yeah.
So when from Portugal we went to Ecuador, and there I was bar mitzvah in
you
Ecuador
were.
about 3 months after I got.
I see. So Ecuador always has seemed to me, as long as I've known you, a strange choice. How did that happen? Do you know?
Well, in Italy, my father made the rounds. After the Australian fiasco, he made the rounds of where he could find a consul who would give him a visa for appropriate lubricant. And the consul de jour was the consul of Ecuador. So he got a visa to Ecuador because he helped. He helped with a little bit of money. And our Polish passport was still valid. And he, yes, oh no, it was complicated. He got some document on which the consul could stamp a visa, which he did. And so we had a visa to Ecuador. When my father came home and says, I finally got a visa, it's to Ecuador. And then the next thing he says, I don't know what that is. And I was a bright 12-year-old and said it's in the west coast of South America, so it's all good.
Did you have any trepidation about that, or anybody?
Well, I didn't, because my father seemed calm and tranquil and in charge. I didn't have
that is important.
Well, it's what you do.
Well, some people do it differently. I mean, of course, some refugees are on the verge of being killed and having to escape under very perilous conditions. Your conditions were not, so that helps a little bit. So it sounded like your description of Quito made it seem pretty nice. You were okay with
nice city. It was up in the mountains, 9,000 feet up in the mountains in the Andes. So you have to learn how to breathe. And that's where I met Edith. Should I get her?
No, no, no. Well, not yet, but tell me how you met Edith. How did that
But
happen?
there were about 3,000 Jewish refugees in Ecuador. Ecuador was a popular place for the Jews to go.
Hmm.
3,000 was not a large number, but considering. And so many came from Germany, like Edith's parents did, some from Austria, some from Poland. So there was this community, and of course, being in a very strange place. I mean, Ecuador was about as remote and strange as can be. These refugees, they clung together. They, 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 they could only deal with each other. Then speak Spanish here, and not Spanish here. So what are they going to do? So we were part of a Jewish youth group, and Edith was part of this.
And what did you think of her at the time?
Well, when I first met her, she was 8 years old. I mean,
Oh.
what am I to think? No, I didn't know her that well. She was part of the group, but she was another kid in the group. And then much later, I was almost ready to leave. She was 21. About when I was 20 years old, we dated. She's 5 years older than I, so she was 15 years old when we dated. Again, it wasn't a torrid romance, but we liked each other and knew each other. So when we parted, she stayed there and married another refugee. I came to this country and I married an American.
We'll get to that in a minute. Yeah, it's amazing that you got together. So in Ecuador, did you go to a Jewish school, or how did you
I went
integrate?
to regular Ecuadorian Spanish-speaking school. I had to learn Spanish, which wasn't so hard because Italian and Spanish are both Latin languages, so I could manage fairly easily. And I went to a rather good high school. Of all things, the best thing in Ecuador culturally was the high school.
Wow, really?
Yeah, it was a very good school. The teachers were excellent. It was demanding. I learned a lot.
Is that where you got your interest in science?
Yes.
Not mushrooms.
No, mushrooms came in my 40s. Much later.
We're not going to talk about mushrooms. No. So you stayed in Ecuador for quite a long time.
9 years.
9 years. And went to, I don't believe this, I'm saying this, Kansas?
Yes.
That seems incredible to me.
It seems incredible. There was a reason. A couple of Americans showed up in Ecuador for the summer, and both were students at the University of Kansas. So when it came time to apply to school in America, the University of Kansas stood up as the best of the best. You know why? Because they accepted me. And in their confusion, by that time I had gone to high school and 2 years of medical school. See, in the rest of the world, you don't go to pre-med for 4 years. You don't go to college. In fact, college doesn't exist. You go to professional school after high school.
In Quito?
In Quito. So I went to 2 years of medical school. And I had worked in a lab run by Italian Jews, which a pharmaceutical company where I learned a tremendous amount of microbiology. I really learned a lot. And so I felt quite comfortable. And with that background, I showed up in Lawrence, Kansas. Didn't know what to do with me. Here there's no college, but he went to medical school. So some in their wisdom, they decided I could be a graduate school student. So I became an instant graduate student without going to college.
Really?
And it worked pretty well. I mean, my background was so as I said, the high school was pretty good, so I had some background. But my practical background in microbiology was terrific. I could run circles around my t-shirts. I didn't do a lot because I'd done it all with my own hands. So my boss in Quito at this pharmaceutical company had a wonderful way of teaching. He says, "Do it." He would say, "We need new typhoid bacilli, cultures of typhoid bacilli." So,
Produce
what
them.
I get him says, "You figure it out." And I had to find patients with typhoid and swab them in the appropriate place and isolate typhoid bacilli. So I
First,
learned a lot.
yeah.
So in Kansas, I was an oddball. I was one. And
How did you, was it hard to learn? You were already speaking English, or how did that work?
my English was horrible. It was very horrible. I did not speak English very well. I could read it. I could understand it. I'll give you an example of what my father was like when it came to pushing me into doing things. I was about 15 years old, and one day he comes home and gives me a book in English. He says, "Here, this is, a friend of mine needs this translated, so go ahead and translate it." But I don't speak English. He says, "I don't care, translate it." So I went to the dictionary and blah, microbes, I word by word I translated it. So
Well,
anyhow,
so
I had
this is an important juncture here because your parents were still in Quito.
Ecuador. They stayed in Ecuador. Yeah, I came
They
by
stayed in
myself.
Ecuador.
Yes.
And were they upset that you were going to America, or how did
No,
they?
not. We got it. We actually, it was odd. We got a visa to come to this country, and my parents decided not to come. The reason was they were old. They did not speak English. They would have had to start all over. And so they decided, and at that time, for a change, business was good. About that time, my father had a long period of not such good business. Then, as during that time, it got better. So he says, "Why go? Why leave?" So they stayed there. And then my mother got quite sick and had to leave because medical care in Ecuador wasn't great. So they decided to go to Israel, where they had family and where they finally reunited with their idea about 40 years later.
So how long did they stay in Israel?
They, well, they were retired. They lived in Tel Aviv. My father bought a flat in Tel Aviv.
Bought
And
what?
then my,
He bought what?
a flat, an apartment in Tel Aviv. And then my mother died, and then we died. So I went to Israel a lot of times. I got sick, died. I had many trips, none of them as a tourist.
Very interesting. Okay, so now you're in Kansas and you're looking for food that tastes good,
Oh,
which
boy.
was hard to
Oh,
find,
no.
I guess.
That was impossible to find. I mean, the food was meat and potatoes, and the meat and some vegetables which were way overcooked. And I remember once telling a girl that I like garlic, and she recoiled in horror. Garlic, I mean, that's the devil's food, or something like that. We don't eat garlic in Kansas.
Like you were serving hemlock. I remember that. Yes.
That's right.
So,
That's right.
but I also remember the story about sneaking off to a synagogue to get
That's
some.
right.
Tell
Yeah,
about it.
what happened was that I made friends with a lot of New Yorkers. At that time, the GI Bill became available, and so colleges were overrun. Lots of people going to college. So University of Kansas was a place where New Yorkers would go because they couldn't go where they wanted. So there was a group of New Yorkers. So again, I was part of a expat group, just like in Ecuador. I'd been part of an expat group in Kansas. I didn't know many Kansas, but I knew all the New Yorkers in town. So one day, one of them and I decided, this is Passover, even though we were not religious at all, wouldn't it be nice if we had a Seder? So we hitchhiked to Kansas City where there were synagogues, found a synagogue, talked to the shamus, the sexton, and told him our plight, and he said, no problem. He picked us up with a rich family. We do after services, drove us to the house for the Seder meal. And we enjoyed the Seder. The story I tell is that after a while, the grandmother of the family looked at us, shook her finger and says, "You see, boys, it pays to be religious."
Didn't change you, but you got your
Didn't
meal
change me,
anyway.
but that's fine. But
Didn't change
anyway,
Kansas food either. So you got a degree? How did you
I
go
got a
from
master's. I was a graduate student, so I got a master's degree. Don't ask. I left big holes in my background.
Uh-huh.
But microbiology, yeah, my chemistry and my math were terrible, physics, but my microbiology was okay.
So
I
how did you pick microbiology since that became your life's work? How did that happen?
Well, when I was 12 years old, when we got to Ecuador, we befriended a single guy who my parents liked, and so they had him for dinner a long time. And he was working in that lab where I ended up. He was a physician, dermatologist, and he knew something about microbiology. So he worked as a microbiologist. And I peppered him with questions. I mean, for some reason, asking about microbes was the thing. So that's how I got into microbiology. When I was 12, I was going to be a microbiologist no matter what.
Amazing. It's an unusual profession to just pick out of the blue in Ecuador.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So after, we're going to make this part short, because after Kansas, you went to Philadelphia, right? To University of Pennsylvania.
I got my PhD at the University of Pennsylvania.
Yeah. In a disappointing department that you didn't like.
Yeah, I didn't like those people really bad, but I made it. Well, my boss had weird ideas about science. First of all, I had no money. So I had to find a lab where they would give me a few bucks to live on, which I did. And the guy was pretty strange. And his ideas were pretty strange. And he was very intolerant of anybody who doubted him. So I couldn't begin to tell him what I thought. So anyhow, but for reasons which are beyond belief, they thought they wanted students to rotate through very fast. So since I had a master's and a year plus, I stayed another year for master's. I had 2.5 years of graduate school. They gave me a PhD after 2 years.
Oh my God.
I was very happy.
So all was not lost because
I just tried.
it was good food.
From a major university after all, the University of Pennsylvania, fine university except for that department. It was so crazy that I wrote this when I was walking down the path with another student from some other department. He asked me, "What do you do here?" I said, "I'm a graduate student in microbiology." He said, "Fancy admitting it."
Amazing. That's an amazing story.
Anyhow, then I got drafted.
What?
Then I got drafted.
That's right. You served in the United States Army.
Right. I was a private in the Army of the United States. But the Army at that point had learned from World War II that scientists ought to be in a lab. So instead of sending me to be a truck driver in Korea, it was the Korean War, they sent me to a lab at Walter Reed. I spent 2 very happy years at Walter Reed, the Army Institute of Research, not the hospital. And I worked for phenomenal good scientists. It was my graduate school. Really, it
sounds like you had a wonderful time there. Everybody was named with a C or something like that.
I had to clean the barracks before and after work, but it's not that bad.
And you met your wife.
I met my wife. Well, I met my wife in Kansas.
You did?
My wife was from Oklahoma. She was a Kansas girl. Don't ask. So there were problems with that, but we got over it. And when I went to Philadelphia, she joined me in Philadelphia. We got married. And then when I got into the Army, she stayed in Philadelphia. Got a master's in social work.
So after you were married and after you were in Philadelphia, if I got this straight, you went to Denmark. Is that right?
No, I went to the Army. Went to the Army in Washington, D.C.
The Army, right.
And then, when I got out of there, it was time to do a postdoctoral fellowship. So my then wife had fallen in love with Scandinavia, and because she had taken a course in Kansas on Scandinavian civilization, and fell in love both with Scandinavian civilization and with her teachers. So she said, "Can we go to Scandinavia?" So it happened, there was a lab in Copenhagen that I wanted to go to, and they accepted me. So I spent 2 years in Copenhagen.
So that sounds like a fantastic experience.
Unbelievable. It was the best time of my life. It was unbelievable. Denmark is the happiest country in the world, still is. It was then, and it was just lovely. It was a fantastic time. And I got some work done. I got some work on which set me up. So
Was
then
that
from
no?
there,
That was not your introduction to DNA. That was
no,
later.
I worked again at Walter Reed in the army. I worked for DNA.
Right. Was
So,
it from there that you went to Tufts? Not from Denmark.
no, from Denmark, I went to the University of Florida,
All right. Oh, Gainesville, right.
Gainesville, another
Learn how
campus.
to speak English.
It was certainly different. But it was a new medical school with faculty which were all imported, all expats, more belonging to a group that wasn't the typical. And so I spent 4 years there, which worked pretty well. And then from there I went to Tufts, and I spent 33 years at Tufts in Boston.
Okay, so we're going to summarize that in a couple of sentences, which is um,
I did okay.
yes, you did very well. You became chairman of the department
I
for
became chairman of the department for 23 years.
Yes.
And I like that because it was a fantastic department. It was perhaps the best department in the university. And a notable department of microbiology worldwide. So it was a good department, and I got some work done. I wrote a bunch of textbooks. So
Did a lot of teaching.
I did a lot. I taught more than the rest of the department put together. One day I decided that I had to stop. So I called the department together and I said, what happens if I break a leg? One guy says, we'll give you a crutch.
Very sympathetic.
But I put a halt to that because I was doing most of it. I just love teaching.
It was interesting that you had emulated the chairman of the department that was there that you thought was so good because he ran the department in a democratic way.
That's right.
Yeah, can you say just a couple of words about that? That's a very interesting
Well,
way.
in medical schools, chairman of the department is very autocratic. And my boss decided we're going to do it totally democratically. Everybody's going to have the same voice and the same vote. And he, as chairman, has one vote. I kept it up, and I meant it. So, but it had a tremendous advantage. It meant that if somebody wanted to have something done, they had to do it. My job was easy. Everybody had to contribute.
Anyway, and during that stay, your wife unfortunately developed cancer and died. And your two children, of course, were born and grew up there, I guess, in Medford, or did you do in Boston, or where?
My daughter was born in Gainesville, Florida. My son was born in Boston. So they're both doing terrifically.
Right.
My daughter is a major stained glass artist, one of the major ones in the country.
That's remarkable.
My son is very proud.
So, after Barbara died, you met your, not childhood sweetheart exactly, but
my kind of sweetheart. What
Yeah.
happened was I was at loose ends, as you can imagine. I was climbing the walls. And one day I get a call from the leader saying, I live in San Diego, but I'm coming to Boston to visit. We have lunch together, so lunch, which wasn't too good because she claims I could only talk about my problems. What? Anyhow, she was quite,
better than mushrooms.
right. But anyhow, after that we went to dinner, and things happened. And I came to San Diego from Boston for the weekend, as soon as she was back. She was here for the weekend. And we just then kept it up. Eventually got married. The question was, would she come to Boston? Would I come to San Diego? Well, it was a complicated choice, but I chose well.
Meaning that you retired from your academic.
I had already retired, actually. I had stopped being chairman. So,
But you were still teaching.
oh yeah.
Yeah.
When I came, I started. I taught here too. I'm teaching as a disease.
It's good disease. So there are at least two or three postscripts to your career, your blog, your other thing that you do, and
I have a
your
blog and a podcast. I have a blog called Small Things Considered. Not a bad title. It wasn't my title. It's a great title. And I did it alone for a long time. Twice a week I would post something. And eventually I was joined by several other people. Now there is 4 of us. And we specialize in stories in microbiology which are unusual, which most microbiologists don't know about. And when the response that we like to get is, gee, I didn't know that. So that's kind of what we do. I also do a podcast called This Week in Microbiology, also with 3 other people. And we just go over papers. Every 2 weeks we go over papers and discuss it. It's like being together over a beer, only we do it online.
No, it sounds terrific, Elio, that you kept
It's
all this up, plus your work on mushrooms and your book on mushrooms, but we're not going to talk about that because everybody that's watching this knows that. But during your course of stay in Boston, you met Edith, you married Edith, and so Edith being a refugee too, if we can possibly hear from Edith about her story a little bit.
Hold on. Edith, can you come?
Do you speak to each other in Spanish?
No, in English.
In English. It sounded like English, yeah.
What you mean?
So you've been together, what, 17 years or
We've been together 26 years.
26? You and
I'll
Edith.
give up more than that.
More than that.
Be 90.
Hi, Edith.
Hi.
Hi. We have spent a lot of time on Elio's
I can't hear
very
anything.
background.
It's okay. You can't hear her?
No,
Oh, hold on.
yes, too bad.
Hold on.
You don't need to hear.
You can't hear?
No, hold on.
Can you hear now? Can you hear? No?
Can you say something?
Yes, I'm saying something now. I'm saying something.
Yeah.
Nothing? Oh my gosh. Now? Can you hear?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Now I can.
So, how did you get to Ecuador? What was your background?
Oh, well, I was very young when we got to Ecuador.
From?
So from Munich, my parents were in Munich. And my mother was born in a little town not too far from Munich.
What was
And my
happening?
father was born in Alsace-Lorraine.
What was happening in Munich at the time that they left for Ecuador?
Well, in 1933, my father lost his job at the bank. He had quite a high job, but they had to let him go.
Because
Actually, recently, because he was Jewish. I just found a letter not too long ago, where the letter that they wrote to him, that they wouldn't do that, but because it's a law that they cannot keep Jews.
so did he
So-
have, let me turn this on. Did he have a hard time leaving Germany?
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, everybody had a hard time leaving. You left your family, your friends, your job,
Money?
education, money, everything.
And Ecuador was the destination by chance?
Wasn't just by chance. We had a visa from Argentina, and when we got that was given to us in Munich, And when we all, before we left for any place, we had to go to Paris, to France, to wait for a ship
Hmm.
that would take us. And they needed some stamp or something from the consul of Argentina. So we left with my uncle and his wife and child, my cousin. So when they got to the consul Argentina, he looked at the visa and he ripped it and he said, "We have enough Jews in Argentina. We don't need
Oh my
you."
gosh.
So then they started again to look for a visa, and they went from consul to consul until they got to the Ecuadorian consul, and they could bribe him. He was ready for some money. He was ready to give us the visa.
Oh my God.
That's how we got to Ecuador, just by chance.
How old were you by that time?
I was 5.5.
Oh my God. Do you remember anything?
Very little, very little. I remember, and it was all very frightening, but I felt my parents will take care of it.
Yeah.
I was too young to really
Yeah.
be fearful.
Did you have siblings? You do, don't you?
One brother,
Yeah.
just 1.5 years older.
Yeah. So you spent the rest of your life in Ecuador, is that right? Or how did that work?
Well, until 1960, where we came to the United States.
Your whole
Actually,
family,
San Diego.
your whole family came.
Well, first, just with my husband and the 2 children, and I had another child in San Diego. And little by little, the whole family came to San Diego. We were the pioneers.
Why did you leave Ecuador?
I wanted my children to grow up in a better country and someplace where they could learn more.
Was there anti-Semitism in Ecuador at all? Or
No, nothing too bad.
no? But you were educated there. You
But-
got pretty good education.
No, not too much education.
No.
No, because you couldn't learn too much in Ecuador. Now Ecuador is quite advanced and you can learn anything you want to. But at the time, it was quite primitive. I went to a regular Indian school. We didn't have the means to pay for private school, which were a little better.
What did your father do there?
My father was economist. He had a PhD, and once in Ecuador, it was lost. It was nothing significant that he did. Together with my uncle, the 2 families went to a farm and they start farming, which they didn't know anything about it. And they lost the rest of their money on that. So,
do you remember as a teenager meeting this guy next to you?
of course,
You
not a
did?
teenager. I was 9 years old when I
You were
met
9
him.
years old. He was a teenager.
He was a teenager, yeah.
And did you purposely go to Boston to find him many years later?
Well, yes. It just came about though. my neighbor, I was alone. I was separated from my husband. And my neighbor next door came to me and said, wouldn't you, now that you're alone, wouldn't you want to go on a trip with me? I'm going to Boston and I'm going on the elder hostel. I said, well, I'm not old enough for the elder hostel, but I'll travel the rest of your trip with you in Boston and around it. So that's how we got to Boston. But I knew that
You knew he
Elio
was
was
there?
there.
How did you know that? Had you kept in touch?
Not really, no. But the family, well, what happened is that my aunt, the sister of my mother, went to Israel with her husband. And Elio's parents went to Israel, and they were very close friends.
Oh,
And
amazing.
and Elio's mother died, and the husband of my aunt died, and they too were an item. Elio never knew about it. So Elio's father will talk about his son to my aunt. And she wrote every week a long letter to my mother and said, and my mother said, remember, you liked Elio, and he is doing this and this and that. So I knew what he was doing. So through other things, I just knew where he was.
Very
And that he had lost years ago with his wife.
interesting.
So it
So,
was.
did
Yes.
you have a career? Did you have a career, Edith?
No, I didn't.
No.
I
So,
didn't.
so here you are, two people that have gone through many countries and many experiences, especially Elio. And would you say, what kind of effect has that had on your lives, Elio, especially yours, because you have made such remarkable transitions and have had to learn so many different lifestyles and languages? And can you hear me?
You can hear.
I was asking what effect all these transitions that you've had to make.
You have to have it in both ears.
Yes.
What effect on your life have all these transitions that you've had to make had?
I don't know. I don't know. I'm sure it had an effect. I couldn't tell you. It made. In Ecuador, you learn to be flexible, to give with the influences on you. And I think I probably learned that flexibility from my life experience.
Did you said somewhere in your memoirs here that you've always felt like an outsider, right? Sorry, can you not hear me?
I'm sorry, say again?
That you've always felt like an outsider. I can't remember the
Yes.
exact quote, but
Sure. I felt like an expat. I didn't feel like I belonged to any group, and it took me settling in Boston for many years until I could say, yeah, this is home. I didn't feel I was at home.
so the expat feeling that you had, you don't have anymore.
No, I don't. No. I mean, this is half my life is since then. I've been an American for over half my life, well over half my life, and it's sunk in. No, I don't feel.
I mean, just looking at it from the outside, it seems to me that your parents gave you a lot of security and strength.
How?
Your computer, you
Oh,
can't. Sorry, you just can't hear from your computer.
I can do something here. I can do something.
It's okay. I think we got the gist of it, but it just seems to me that between the security that your parents gave you and your own flexibility that you developed as you grew up, that you have led a remarkable life that maybe being a refugee actually helped. Anyway, my
Maybe.
conclusion.
Thank
Maybe.
you so much, Faye.
Thank you, both of you, for telling us about yourself. Elio, I enjoyed your memoirs tremendously.
Thank you, Mom.
And tell
Don't forget
people
that.
again, you can find them
Elio's